The fluorescent lights of the subway car flickered as the train pulled away from 42nd Street, and Emma Rodriguez felt her eyelids growing heavy despite her best efforts to stay alert. She'd been awake for nearly 20 hours straight, working her overnight shift at the hospital laundry, then rushing home to get her 4-year-old daughter Mia ready for daycare, then heading to her afternoon job cleaning offices downtown. Emma shifted uncomfortably in her seat, trying to keep her back straight and her eyes open. She still had a 40-minute ride ahead of her before she could collapse into her own bed for 3 precious hours of sleep before, picking up Mia and starting the cycle all over again. The subway car was crowded with the usual mix of commuters, business, people checking their phones, students with headphones, workers heading home from late shifts. Emma barely registered the man who sat down beside her at the 34th Street station, except to notice that his suit was expensive and his briefcase looked like it cost more than she made in a month. As the train swayed gently through the tunnels, Emma's exhaustion finally won the battle she'd been fighting all day. Her head began to nod forward, then to the side, until it came to rest against the shoulder of the stranger sitting next to her. David Park felt the gentle weight against his shoulder and looked down to see a young woman, probably in her late 20s, fast asleep against his navy suit jacket. Her dark hair had escaped from what had clearly been a careful ponytail that morning, and there were deep circles under her eyes that spoke of bone-deep exhaustion. David's first instinct was to gently wake her. It would be the polite thing to do. But something about her complete vulnerability, the way her breathing had immediately deepened into the desperate sleep of someone who rarely got enough rest, made him pause. He glanced around the subway car, noting the way other passengers were looking at them with a mixture of amusement and irritation. A businessman across the aisle rolled his eyes and muttered something about homeless people to his companion. A teenager with expensive headphones smirked and started to pull out her phone. Clearly planning to take a photo, David shifted slightly, positioning himself to block the teenager's view while being careful not to disturb the sleeping woman. He'd planned to spend the ride reviewing quarterly reports on his tablet, but instead he found himself becoming an impromptu guardian for a stranger who clearly needed rest more than he needed to work. 20 minutes passed. The woman slept peacefully against his shoulder, occasionally murmuring something that sounded like "Mia, baby" in her sleep. David learned from her employee ID badge, which had shifted to become visible, that her name was Emma Rodriguez, and she worked at St. Mary's Hospital. At the Union Square station, a group of rowdy college students got on, laughing loudly and stumbling slightly from whatever they'd been drinking. One of them noticed Emma sleeping and nudged his friend. "Hey, look at this," he said loudly. "Lady's using some random dude as a pillow." "Probably drunk," his friend replied, equally loud. "Or high. Should we wake her up?" "This is hilarious." David felt Emma stir slightly at the noise, but not wake up. He turned toward the students with an expression that had silenced boardrooms full of executives. "She's exhausted, not intoxicated," he said quietly but firmly. "And she's not bothering anyone. I suggest you find something else to entertain yourselves," something in David's tone and bearing, the unmistakable authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed, made the students mumble apologies and move to the other end of the car. As the train continued its journey, David found himself studying Emma's face, noting the calluses on her hands that suggested physical work, the way her clothes were clean but worn, the small silver cross necklace that had tangled in her hair. This was someone who worked hard, probably multiple jobs, and was struggling to make ends meet. At the 14th Street station, Emma suddenly jerked awake, her head lifting from David's shoulder as she realized where she was. "Oh my God!" she gasped, her cheeks flushing red. "I am so sorry. I can't believe I didn't mean to." "It's perfectly fine," David said gently. "You looked like you needed the rest." Emma scrambled to gather her purse and the small grocery bag at her feet, clearly mortified. "I work 2 jobs and I haven't slept much, but that's no excuse for—" "I'm just so embarrassed." "Please don't be," David said. "Everyone needs rest." "I'm David, by the way." "Emma?" she replied automatically, then seemed to register his kindness. "Thank you for not waking me up." Most people would have been annoyed. "Where are you headed?" David asked as the train began to slow for the next station. Chinatown, Emma said. I have to pick up some groceries before the good market closes, then get my daughter from daycare. David glanced at his watch. It was 6:15 p.m., and he knew the daycare centers in the area typically closed at 6:30. Emma would have maybe 10 minutes to shop and still make it on time. This is my stop, David said as the train pulled into Canal Street, though it actually wasn't. Mind if I walk with you? I know a great market that has excellent prices. Emma looked at him suspiciously, clearly wondering why a man in an expensive suit would want to walk through Chinatown with a stranger. You don't have to do that. I'm sure you have important places to be. Not more important than making sure you get to your daughter on time, David said simply. Something in his tone made Emma nod, and they exited the train together. As they walked through the busy streets, David learned that Emma worked at the hospital laundry from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., then cleaned offices from 2 p.m. to 6 p.m. Her daughter Mia was 4 years old, and the daycare was the only one Emma could afford that stayed open late enough for her schedule. The manager lets me pay weekly instead of monthly, Emma explained as they stopped at a produce stand where she carefully selected the least expensive vegetables. It's the only way I can manage it. David watched as Emma counted out exact change for a small bag of rice, some vegetables, and a piece of fish that would clearly be stretched to make several meals. Her grocery budget appeared to be about $15, and she spent it with the careful consideration of someone who couldn't afford to make mistakes. Emma, David said as they left the market, I know this might sound presumptuous, but I'd like to help you. Emma stopped walking, her expression immediately guarded. I don't need charity. Not charity. An opportunity. David pulled a business card from his wallet. I run a company called Park Solutions. We provide support services to businesses, cleaning, maintenance, security, things like that. I'm always looking for reliable people, and anyone who works 2 jobs while raising a child alone clearly understands responsibility. Emma looked at the card, and David saw her eyes widen slightly as she read his title, CEO and founder. You're offering me a job? I'm offering you an interview. The position would be managing a team of cleaning staff for one of our major corporate clients. It's Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 4 p.m., with benefits including health insurance and paid time off. The salary would be enough that you wouldn't need a second job. Emma stared at him, and David could see her trying to process whether this was real or some kind of elaborate joke. Why would you do this? You don't know anything about me. I know that you work 2 jobs to support your daughter. I know that you're so exhausted you fall asleep on strangers' shoulders, but you still apologize for it. I know that you budget $15 for groceries and make it work. That tells me everything I need to know about your character. Emma's eyes filled with tears. I don't know what to say. Say you'll think about it. Here's my direct number, David wrote on the back of his card. Call me tomorrow if you're interested. The interview can be whenever works with your schedule. They had reached the daycare center, and through the window, David could see a little girl with Emma's dark hair playing with blocks while glancing anxiously toward the door. That's Mia, Emma said softly, following his gaze. She worries when I'm late. She's beautiful, David said. Emma, whatever you decide about the job, I want you to know that you're an incredible mother. Mia is lucky to have someone who works so hard for her. Emma wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. Thank you, David, for everything. For letting me sleep, for walking with me, for seeing me as a person instead of just some woman who fell asleep on your shoulder. Everyone deserves to be seen, David said simply. I'll hope to hear from you tomorrow. As David walked back toward the subway station, he thought about the quarterly reports waiting on his tablet, the dinner meeting he'd originally been heading to, the comfortable life he'd built through years of hard work and smart decisions. Then he thought about Emma, counting out change for groceries while running on 3 hours of sleep, and realized that success meant nothing if you couldn't use it to help others when the opportunity arose. The next morning, David was reviewing resumes in his office when his assistant buzzed him. Mr. Park, there's an Emma Rodriguez here to see you. She says you gave her your card? David smiled. Send her right in. Emma entered his office wearing a simple black dress that was clearly her best outfit. her hair pulled back neatly, her posture straight despite what had probably been another sleepless night. "I called first thing this morning," she said, "but your assistant said you could see me right away. I hope that's okay." "More than okay. Please, have a seat. How was your night?" Emma smiled, the first genuine smile David had seen from her. "Better than usual. I kept thinking about what you said, about opportunities and possibilities. I haven't felt hopeful about anything in a long time." Over the next hour, David conducted what was probably the most enjoyable job interview of his career. Emma was intelligent, articulate, and had management experience from her previous job at a retail store before Mia was born. More importantly, she had the kind of work ethic and attention to detail that couldn't be taught. "The position is yours if you want it," David said as the interview concluded. "You can start Monday, which gives you time to give proper notice at your current jobs." Emma's hands shook slightly as she signed the employment paperwork. "I can't believe this is happening. Yesterday morning I was wondering how I was going to pay for Mia's daycare this week, and now you don't have to choose between sleep and survival," David said. "Emma, I want you to know that this isn't charity. You earned this job through your qualifications and your character. I have no doubt you'll excel at it." 6 months later, David was walking through the corporate offices that Emma now managed, observing her team's work with satisfaction. The client had specifically requested to extend their contract, praising the improvement in service quality since Emma had taken over. "Mr. Park?" Emma's voice called from behind him. She approached with a clipboard and a confident smile that had replaced the exhausted worry he'd first seen on the subway. "I wanted to update you on the quarterly performance metrics." As Emma outlined her team's achievements, improved efficiency, reduced turnover, client satisfaction scores that exceeded targets, David marveled at the transformation. This was a woman who had found her element, who thrived when given the opportunity to use her natural leadership abilities. "Excellent work as always," David said when she finished her presentation. "How are you settling into the new apartment?" Emma's smile grew brighter. "Mia loves having her own room, and I love that it's only 10 minutes from her school instead of an hour on the subway. Thank you again for helping us find it." David had indeed helped Emma find a better apartment closer to Mia's school, though he'd been careful to frame it as assistance with relocation logistics rather than charity. Emma's pride was important to him, and he never wanted her to feel like a recipient of pity rather than a valued employee who had earned her success. "Any regrets about leaving the hospital laundry?" David asked with a slight smile. Emma laughed. "Only that I didn't fall asleep on the shoulder of a CEO sooner." "I have a confession," David said. "That wasn't actually my stop that day. I got off the train because I could see you were going to be late picking up Mia, and I thought you might need help." Emma stared at him. "You missed your stop? Where were you supposed to get off?" "Times Square. I had a dinner meeting in Midtown that I ended up canceling." "David." Emma's voice was soft with emotion. "Why did you do all this, really?" David considered the question, thinking back to that moment on the subway when he'd first seen Emma sleeping against his shoulder, vulnerable and trusting in a way that had touched something deep in his heart. "I think," he said finally, "because I recognized something in you that reminded me of my own mother. She worked multiple jobs to raise me and my sister after our father left. I used to watch her fall asleep on buses and subway trains, exhausted from doing everything she could to give us a better life." He paused, then continued. "I succeeded in business partly because of the work ethic she taught me, partly because of good luck and timing, but mostly because people along the way saw potential in me and gave me opportunities I couldn't have found on my own. Helping you wasn't charity, Emma. It was paying forward what others did for me." Emma wiped her eyes, smiling through tears. "Your mother raised a good man. She raised a man who understands that sometimes the most important business decisions happen on subway trains at the end of long days, when we choose to see each other as human beings instead of strangers." That evening, David took the same subway line home as always, but now he paid closer attention to his fellow passengers. He noticed the woman struggling with groceries and a crying baby, the teenager who looked hungry, the elderly man counting change for his fare. He'd learned something important from Emma. that kindness isn't about grand gestures or life-changing interventions. Sometimes it's as simple as letting someone rest on your shoulder when they need it, or taking a few extra stops to make sure they get where they need to go safely. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, those small acts of human decency turn into something larger: friendship, community. The recognition that we're all just people trying to make it through our days with dignity and hope intact. As his train pulled into his station, David thought about Emma, probably at home helping Mia with homework. No longer running on empty, but building a future filled with possibilities. It had started with a moment of accidental trust, her head on his shoulder, his choice to protect her rest instead of wake her up. Sometimes, David reflected as he climbed the subway stairs toward home, the most important connections we make happen when we're not looking for them at all. They happen when we simply choose to be kind to the strangers who cross our paths in moments of need.